Upon a time before the fairy broods drove nymph and satyr from the prosperous woods, before King Oberon's bright diadem, sceptre and mantle clasped with dewy gem, frightened away the dryads and the fauns from rushes green and brakes and cow-slipped lawns. The ever-smitten Hermes empty left his golden throne, bent warm on amorous theft. From high Olympus had he stolen light, on this side of Jove's clouds to escape the sight of his great summoner, and made retreat into a forest on the shores of Crete. For somewhere in that sacred island dwelt a nymph to whom all hooved satyrs knelt, at whose white feet the languid Tritons poured pearls, while on land they withered and adored. Fast by the springs where she to bathe was wont, and in those meads where sometime she might haunt, were strewn rich gifts unknown to any muse, though fancy's casket were unlocked to choose. Ah, what a world of love was at her feet, so Hermes thought, and a celestial heat burned from his winged heels to either ear, that from a whiteness as the lily clear blushed into roses mid his golden hair, fallen in jealous curls about his shoulders bare. From vale to vale, from wood to wood he flew, breathing upon the flowers his passion new, and wound with many a river to its head, to find where this sweet nymph prepared her secret bed. In vain the sweet nymph might nowhere be found, and so he rested on the lonely ground, pensive and full of painful jealousies of the wood gods and even the very trees. There, as he stood, he heard a mournful voice, such as one heard in gentle heart destroys all pain but pity. Thus the lone voice spake: when from this wreathed tomb shall I awake? When move in a sweet body fit for life, and love and pleasure and the ruddy strife of hearts and lips. Ah, miserable me! The god, dove-footed, glided silently round bush and tree, soft brushing in his speed the taller grasses and full flowering weed, until he found a palpitating snake, bright and circouchant in a dusky brake. She was a Gordian shape of dazzling hue, vermilion spotted, golden, green and blue, striped like a zebra, freckled like a pard, eyed like a peacock, and all crimson barred, and full of silver moons that, as she breathed, dissolved or brighter shone or interwreathed. They're lustrous with their gloomier tapestries, so rainbow-sided, touched with miseries. She seemed at once some penanced lady elf, some demon's mistress, or the demon's self. Upon her crest she wore a wainish fire, sprinkled with stars, like Ariadne's tiara. Her head was serpent, but bitter-sweet. She had a woman's mouth with all its pearls complete. And for her eyes, what could such eyes do there, but weep and weep that they were born so fair? As Proserpine still weeps for her Sicilian heir, her throat was serpent, but the words she spake came as through bubbling honey, for love's sake. And thus, while Hermes on his pinions lay, like a stooped falcon, here he takes his prey. Fair Hermes, crowned with feathers fluttering light, I had a splendid dream of thee last night. I saw thee sitting there on a throne of gold, among the gods upon Olympus old. The only sad one, for thou didst not hear the soft lute-fingered muse chanting clear, nor even Apollo when he sang alone, deaf to his throbbing throat's long, long, melodious moan. I dreamt I saw thee, robed in purple flakes, break amorous through the clouds as morning breaks, and swiftly as a bright Phoebean dart strike for the Grecian isle, and here thou art. Too gentle Hermes, hast thou found the maid, or at the star of Lethe not delayed his rosy eloquence, and thus inquired, thou smooth-lipped serpent, truly high-inspired, thou beauteous wreath with melancholy eyes, possess whatever bliss thou canst devise, telling me only where my nymph is fled, where she doth breathe, bright planet thou hast said. Returned the snake, but sealed with oaths, fair god. I swear, said Hermes, by my serpent rod, and by thine eyes, and by thy starry crown. Light flew his earnest words among the blossoms blown. Then thus again the brilliant feminine, too frail of heart for this lost nymph of thine. Free as the air, invisibly she strays about these thornless winds her pleasant days. She tastes unseen, unseen her nimble feet leave traces in the grass and flowers sweet. From wary tendrils and bowed branches green, she plucks the fruit unseen, she bathes unseen, and by my power is her beauty veiled, to keep it unaffronted, unassailed by love glances of unlovely eyes, of satyrs fawned and blurred Silenus sighs. Pale grew her immortality for woe of all these lovers, and she grieved, so I took compassion on her, bade her steep her hair in weird syrops that would keep her loveliness invisible, yet free to wander as she loves, in liberty. Thou shalt behold her, Hermes, thou alone. If thou wilt, as thou swearest, grant my boon. Then once again the charmed god began an oath, and through the serpent's ears it ran, warm, tremulous, devout, Soltarian. Ravished she lifted her Circean head, blushed, a live damask, and swift lisping said, I was a woman, let me have once more a woman's shape, and charming as before. I love a youth of Corinth, oh the bliss! Give me my woman's form, and place me where he is. Stoop, Hermes, let me breathe upon thy brow, and thou shalt see thy sweet nymph even now. The god on half-shut feathers sank serene. She breathed upon his eyes, and swift was seen of both the guarded nymph near smiling on the green. It was no dream, or say a dream it was. Real are the dreams of gods, and smoothly pass their pleasures in a long immortal dream. One warm flushed moment, hovering, it might seem, dashed by the wood nymph's beauty, so he burned. Then lightning on the printless verdure turned to the swooned serpent, and with languid arm, delicate, put to proof the lithe Caducean charm. So done, upon the nymph his eyes he bent, full of adoring teals and blandishment, and towards her stepped she, like a moon in wane, faded before him, coward, nor could restrain her fearful sobs, self-folding like a flower that faints into itself at the evening hour. But the god fostering her chilled hand, she felt the warmth, her eyelids opened bland, and like new flowers at morning song of bees, bloomed and gave up her honey to the lees. Into the green recessed woods they flew, nor grew they pale, as mortal lovers do. Left to herself, the serpent now began to change, her elfin blood in madness ran, her mouth foamed, and the grass therewith besprent, withered at dew so sweet and virulent. Her eyes in torture fixed, in anguish drear, hot glazed and wide, with lid lashes all sear, flashed phosphor and sharp sparks, without one cooling tear. The colour all inflamed throughout her train, she writhed about, convulsed with scarlet pain. A deep Vulcanian yellow took the place of all her milder mooned body's graced. And as the lava ravishes the mead, spoil all her silver mail and golden breed, made gloom of all her freckles, streaks and bars, eclipsed her crescents and licked up her stars, so that in moments few she was undressed of all her sapphires, greens and amethyst, and rubious argent of all these bereft, nothing but pain and ugliness were left. Still shone her crown that vanished, also she melted and disappeared so suddenly, and in the air her new voice, luting soft, cried, Lycius, gentle Lycius, borne aloft with the bright mists about the mountains hoar. These words dissolved, Crete's forests heard no more. Whither fled Lamia, now a lady bright, a full-born beauty new and exquisite? She fled into that valley they passed over, who go to Corinth from Centrius shore, and rested at the foot of those wild hills, the rugged founts of the Piraean rills, and of that other ridge whose barren back stretches with all its mist and cloudy rack, southwestward to Cleon. There she stood, about a young bird's flutter from a wood, fair on a sloppy green of mossy tread, by a clear pool wherein she passioned to see herself escaped from so sore ills, while her robes flaunted with the daffodils. Ah, happy Lycius, for she was a maid more beautiful than ever twisting braid, or sighed or blushed, or on spring-flowered lea spread a green kirtle to the minstrel's lee. A virgin purest lipped, yet in the lore of love deep learned to the red heart's core, not 1 hour old, yet of sciential brain, to unperplex bliss from its neighbour pain, define their pettish limits and estrange their points of contact and swift counterchange, intrigue with specious chaos and dispart, as though in Cupid's college she had spent sweet days a lovely graduate, still unshent, and kept his rosy terms in idle languishment. Why this fair creature chose so fairily by the wayside to linger, we shall see, but first 'tis fit to tell how she could muse and dream when in the serpent prison house, of all she lists strange or magnificent, however where she willed her spirit went, whether to faint Elysium, or where down through trees lifting waves the Nereids fair wind into Thetis' bower by many a pearly stair, or where god Bacchus drains his cups divine, stretched out at ease beneath the gluttonous pine, or where in Pluto's gardens palatine Cybers' columns gleam in far Piazzian line. And sometimes into cities she would send her dream with feast and rioting to blend. And once, while among mortals dreaming thus, she saw the young Corinthian Lycius charioting foremost in the envious race, like a young Jove with a calm uneager face, and fell into the swooning love of him. Now on the moth time of that evening dim, he would return that way, as well she knew, to Corinth from the shore for freshly blew the eastern soft wind, and his galley now grated the keystones with her brazen prow. In Port Cencreus from Aegina Isle, fresh anchored whither he had been a while, to sacrifice to Jove, whose temple there waits with high marble doors for blood and incense rare. Jove heard his vows, and better his desire, for by some freakful chance he made retire from his companions and set forth to walk, perhaps grown wearied of their Corinth talk. Over the solitary hills he fared, thoughtless at first, but ere eve's star appeared, his fantasy was lost where reason fades, in the calm twilight of platonic shades. Lamia beheld him coming near, more near, close to her passing, in indifference drear. His silent sandals swept the mossy green, so neighboured to him and yet so unseen. She stood, he passed, shut up in mysteries, his mind wrapped like his mantle, while her eyes followed his steps, and her neck regal white turned syllabling thus, "Ah, Lycius bright, and will you leave me on the hills alone? Lycius, look back, and be some pity shown." He did, not with cold wonder fearingly, but Orpheus-like at an Eurydice, for so delicious were the words she sung, it seemed he had loved them a whole summer long. And soon his eyes had drunk her beauty up, leaving no drop in the bewildering cup. And still the cup was full, while he afraid, lest she should vanish ere his lip had paid, due adoration thus began to adore. Her soft looking growing coy, she saw his chain so sure. "Leave thee alone, look back, ah goddess, see whether my eyes can ever turn from thee. For pity do not this sad heart belie, even as thou vanished, so I shall die. Stay, though a naiad of the rivers, stay, to thy far wishes will thy streams obey. Stay, though the greenest woods be thy domain, alone they can drink up the morning rain. Though a descendant Pleiad will not one of thine harmonious sisters keep in tune, thy spheres and as thy silver proxy shine, so sweetly to these ravished ears of mine came thy sweet greeting, that if thou shouldest fade, thy memory will waste me to a shade. For pity do not melt, if I should stay, said Lamia, here upon this floor of clay, and pain my steps upon these flowers too rough. What canst thou say or do of charm enough to dull the nice remembrance of my home? Thou canst not ask me with thee here to roam over these hills and vales where no joy is, empty of immortality and bliss. Thou art a scholar, Lycius, and must know that finer spirits cannot breathe below in human climes and live. Alas, poor youth, what taste of pure air hast thou to soothe my essence? What serener palaces, where I may all my many senses please, and by mysterious slates 100 thirsts appease? It cannot be a dew, so she said. She rose, tiptoe with white arms spread, he sick to lose the amorous promise of her love complain, swooned murmuring of love, and pale with pain. The cruel lady, without any show of sorrow for her tender favourite's woe, but rather, if her eyes could brighter be, with brighter eyes and slow amenity, put her new lips to his, and gave afresh the life she had so tangled in her mesh. And as he from one trance was wakening, into another she began to see, happy in beauty, life and love and everything, a song of love too sweet for earthly lyres. While, like held breath, the stars drew in their panting fires, and then she whispered in such trembling tone, as those who safe together met alone, for the first time through many anguished days, use other speech than looks, bidding him raise his drooping head and clear his soul of doubt, for that she was a woman, and without any more subtle fluid in her veins than throbbing blood, and that the self-same pains inhabited her frail, strung heart as his. And next she wondered how his eyes could miss her face so long in Corinth, where, she said, she dwelt but half retired, and there had led days happy as the gold coin could invent, without the aid of love, yet in content, till she saw him, as once she passed him by, where against a column he leant thoughtfully, at Venus' temple porch, mid baskets heaped of amorous herbs and flowers newly reaped, late on that eve, as 'twas the night before the Edonian feast, whereof she saw no more, but wept alone these days, for why should she adore Lycius from death awoke into amaze, to see her still and singing so sweet lays. Then from amaze into delight he fell, to hear her whisper woman's lore so well, and every word she spake enticed him on, to unperplexed delight and pleasure known. Let the mad poets say whatever they please, of the sweets of fairies, Paris, goddesses. There is not such a treat among them all, haunters of cavern, lake, and waterfall, as a real woman, lineal indeed, from Pyrrha's pebbles or old Adam's seed. Thus gentle Lamia judged, and judged aright, that Lycius could not love in half a fright. So threw the goddess off, and won his heart more pleasantly by playing woman's part, with no more awe than what her beauty gave, that while it smote, still guaranteed to save. Lycius to all made eloquent reply, marrying to every word a twin-born sigh, and last pointing to Corinth, asked her sweet if 'twas too far that night for her soft feet. The way was short for Lamia's eagerness, made by a spell the triple league decrease to a few paces, not at all surmised by blinded Lycius, so in her comprised. They passed the city gates, he knew not how, so noiseless, and he never thought to know. As men talk in a dream, so Corinth all, throughout her Parises imperial, and all her populous streets and temples lewd, muttered like tempest in the distance brewed, to the widespread night above her towers, men, women, rich and poor, in the cool hours, shuffled their sandals over the pavement white, companioned or alone, while many a light flared here and there from wealthy festivals, and threw their moving shadows onto the walls, or found them clustered in the corniced shade of some arched temple door or dusky colonnade, muffling his face of greeting friends in fear. Her fingers he pressed hard as one came near, with curled grey beard, sharp eyes, and smooth bald crown, slow-stepped and robed in philosophic gown. Lycius shrank closer as they met and passed, into his mantle adding wings to haste, while hurried Lamia trembled. "Ah," said he, "why do you shudder, love, so ruefully? Why does your tender palm dissolve in dew?" "I'm wearied," said fair Lamia. "Tell me, who is that old man? I cannot bring to mind his features. Lycius, wherefore did you blind yourself from his quick eyes?" Lycius replied, "'Tis Apollonius sage, my trusty guide, and good instructor, but tonight he seems the ghost of folly, haunting my sweet dreams." While yet he spake, they had arrived before a pillared porch with lofty portal door, where hung a silver lamp whose phosphor glow reflected in the slabbed steps below, mild as a star in water, for so new, and so unsullied was the marble hue. So through the crystal polish liquid fine ran the dark veins that none but feet divine could ever have touched there. Sounds aeolian breathed from the hinges as the ample span of the wide doors disclosed a place unknown, some time to any, but those two alone, and a few Persian mutes, who that same year were seen about the markets, none knew where. They could inhabit, the most curious were foiled, who watched to trace them to their house, and but the flitter-winged verse must tell, for truth's sake, what woe afterwards befell. 'Twould humour many a heart to leave them thus, shut from the busy world of more incredulous. Lamia, Part 1, by John Keats.